The Milottes had a special working relationship with each other and with Walt Disney.
Ordinarily, filming such a picture would require tons of equipment, elaborate safaris, and a half a dozen camera crews. But instead, we had Al and Alma Milotte, a husband and wife team of photographers, and they were all that we needed. Now, the Milottes operate entirely alone. No safaris, no guides. I don't think they even have a gun between them. The equipment they use is only cameras and courage.
You know, we never worked for Walt Disney Productions. We always worked for Walt Disney. And it was a personal thing between us and Walt, it seemed like. We didn't feel we were working for a big company.
Lloyd and Catherine Beebe also pioneered Disney's nature films. The Beebes had a special working relationship with the animals they photographed.
I think I always felt I was a wild animal, a little bit, you know. I was the same as them in a way. And I was always really aware of not pushing an animal, you know, of hurting his feelings or anything. Like some people would have gloves on and grab an animal, which I never did all my life. I always thought, if he won't let me do it, I'm doing something wrong.
The travels of these true-life adventurers were lonely and often perilous, but they brought to the screen one-of-a-kind moments in nature's own drama. So join the Milottes and the Beebes in an around-the-world safari on the Disney Family Album. You might say that the true life adventures began with a little deer named Bambi. Walt Disney had purchased some film of a fawn in its natural state for his animators to study for their Bambi animation. But Walt saw something else.
One thing has always led to another here, and Bambi was no exception. The wildlife scenes in this research yielded an unexpected dividend. An idea for a new motion picture series we called The True Life Adventure.
Disney discovered the Milottes at a travel lecture where they showed animal footage they had shot in Alaska. And before they could say Aleutian Islands, he sent them there to photograph the fur seals off the Alaskan coast, where they spend their summer vacation. Neither the Milottes nor Walt knew what the result would be. Seals were not the most cooperative subjects.
You couldn't get near them because of the bulls. They were very fierce. But we had, at that time, only a 6-inch lens. That was the biggest telephoto lens we had. So we had to get as close as we could. But we were very careful, and all through our photography work, we have always felt that we should never disturb the animals, that we should take the animals as they are. And if we had to wait, that's all right. But we never tried to make them move or come toward us or anything. We never did that. And we had no storyline. You see, we just went out and took the pictures that we could get, and then they took those pictures to make a story. We didn't begin with a story and try to fill it in with pictures. We chose what we thought was interesting. We had to have some kind of activity, and it might be the bulls facing each other and fighting, or it might be the bull throwing a female around, which they did do quite frequently. And then when the little babies came along, there was a lot of activity among the little babies. We had such a cute shot of a big bull stepping on the flipper of a little baby. That was a wonderful shot, and that was the sort of thing we looked for Walt, because we thought that he would do something very good with that.
What Walt did was cut the Milottes' seal footage into 27 minutes of animal adventure, the events of nature presented in human terms by narrator Winston Hibbler.
The beachmaster, well pleased with himself, settles down to watch over his new wives as they take their beauty naps. Sleeping heads gracefully up. Ah, what more could one wish? A good home, adoring wives, a peaceful paradise.
As it turned out, theaters didn't want movies starring only animals until Seal Island won the 1948 Oscar for Best Short Subject. Suddenly, there was a demand for Disney's true life adventures, which went on to win 8 Oscars in all. After Seal Island, the Milottes were off to the Montana wilderness to shoot the next true life adventure in Beaver Valley.
We found a stream that we knew had beaver. We found fresh cuttings and fresh dams, and we spent many months there. The beavers began to work on their dam and work on their house, and then we got some very good action of cutting trees and so forth. And of course, when we got something very good, then we really feel like we should celebrate, because it was such an unusual event.
Animals with human traits are a staple of Disney entertainment. In Beaver Valley, the Milottes also photographed the playful otter.
These are the otters, the gypsies of Beaver Valley. Fun-loving, happy-go-lucky, they're as frolicsome as the beaver is industrious.
And later, their cameras captured the heroic salmon.
Yet, in spite of all, the strong among them survive, fight their way past enemies and obstacles to the spawning beds of Beaver Valley.
The role of valley villain fell to the crafty coyote. To film him in the same scene with his hard-working co-star, the Milottes devised one of their few setup shots.
We picked a place on the stream that had a little side stream, and we put the beaver in there. And then we put a large glass wall so that nothing could come through. The coyote comes down over the hill and looks at the beaver, and you have them in the same shot, but they couldn't get to each other. We just wouldn't put 2 animals together. That wouldn't be the way we would work.
By the time Beaver Valley won the 1952 Short Subject Oscar, the Milottes were already working on their next assignment in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, bear country. For this dangerous job, the Milottes went in well armed.
We had a real lethal protector. We had a slingshot, and so we carried this slingshot. There were times when the bears did get too close, or they would be angry with each other and come toward us, and we just back off, because we didn't want to interfere with what the bears did naturally, because we were only interested in what they did as bears. And so they're just fun to watch. They play, they box, they run around the trees after each other. And one cute shot was of a great big bear sitting down eating a daisy. It put its little face over, and a big face, I should say, and picked this daisy and ate it. I thought that was cute.
One bear sequence in particular tickled Walt Disney's fancy.
We had them scratching, and they laid on their back, and they scratched their tummy and all of this business, and he just loved that. And so that was the one thing he wanted, was bear scratching, and the way they put it together was really great.
In exploring the life cycles of wild animals, the beginnings of life especially fascinated the Milottes. For prowlers of the Everglades, Al and Elma photographed the mysteries of birth.
The alligator eggs, of course, were out in the wild. It was a real nest, and the mother alligator came up, and we watched this until we heard the sound of the alligators beginning to hatch, and we got the alligators, little babies, hatching.
A baby alligator's life is a struggle from the beginning. Struggle to escape his eggshell cradle, and later a constant fight to survive. However, he's born with the equipment to meet his problems. A complete set of sharp teeth and a chip on his shoulder.
From the Everglades, the Milottes ventured to Australia, the land down under, where they filmed the life cycles of nature's strangest creatures.
His scientific name is Paradoxus, and paradox he is. With a bill like a duck, a tail like a beaver, a body like a reptile, and fur like an otter, altogether he's really like nothing else in all the world.
We went to Tasmania and got a bushman who had done nothing all his life but hunt rabbits. And he was just a wonderful man. And he was able to go out and find a platypus for us. And he found a nest. And he found the platypus who was just giving birth, and we have the eggs and the babies that are still wiggling, and just after they were hatched. And that was a very lucky shot. We had a funny experience with the wallabies in Tasmania because we went up in the mountains where there was snow. And at that time, the babies were very, very little, and they were all pink. And their little pink heads stuck out of the pouches. And we stayed up there and photographed them for quite a while, and while it was snowing and then after the snow. Because you don't think of snow in Australia.
Here they remain through spring and on into summer before they learn to forage for themselves.
By far their favorite assignment for Walt Disney was the African lion. Although it took them 3 years of constant danger and almost total isolation to complete, this true life adventure became the adventure of a lifetime, especially for Al Milotte.
He'd have gone to Africa for nothing. All he wanted to do was to go take pictures from morning till night. That's all he wanted to do. He'd rather do that than eat.
Al Milotte was unable to participate in our family album due to a recent illness, but here he is in 1954 narrating a report on their African adventure.
So when we heard that Kruger National Park in South Africa was the place to find lions, that's the place we headed for. Of course, the purpose of our expedition was to film the true life adventure story of the African lion. So in addition to food and general equipment, we took camera accessories for every condition possible in photography. The sounds of Africa were vital to our story too. And so it was a part of our job to make on-the-spot tape recordings. This looks like a lethal weapon, but actually it's only a directional microphone. In the motion picture story of the African lion, the elephant is the heavy in the cast, but only in the matter of size. Although he leads a leisurely life, he's the most vigilant of all animals, and we counted ourselves extremely lucky to catch these intimate glimpses of these elusive animals. Among lions, it's the female who does most of the hunting. With food on all sides, feeding the family wouldn't appear to be much of a problem. But it's an odd fact that the grazing animals can sense when the lioness is hunting. Animals that watched her with only curiosity before are now panic-stricken at her approach. The hunt is a normal part of the lion's existence, and her existence is part of nature's infinite plan. We knew that our feature on the African lion wouldn't be complete without the telling of this chapter. And we believe that this was one of the first unstaged lion kills ever recorded on film. And here it is.
On the Serengeti Plain, the Milottes witnessed the mass migration of huge animal herds, and Al displayed what Alma calls his animal radar.
That was a very exciting time. I'll never forget those great lines of animals that were trudging along over those plains. Well, they came down into this area, and we had seen them scatter, and Al, another time his radar was working, he said, something's happening there, we better go closer. So we went as close to a particular tree as we could go, which was quite a distance, without disturbing what was in the tree. Well, we sat up there and we waited, and pretty soon we saw a leopard. And he then jumped from one branch to another until he got right down to the bottom branch and waited, and then he jumped on a baby wildebeest. And that was extremely exciting, and that's another time we said, that's for Walt.
Sometimes the African drama is harsh. Yet this is the reality of Africa. Life and death, a cycle in endless repetition.
Death in Africa isn't always dealt by the jaws of leopards and lions. Mother Nature has her own snares for even the fiercest creatures, as Al explains.
As we followed this fellow with our cameras down to a water hole, we came upon another rhino, hopelessly bogged in the mud. What we were seeing was a fossil in the making. For this is exactly how prehistoric animals were trapped in the tar pits and clay beds of a bygone era. Deserted by his fellow creatures, his great strength ebbing fast, still the rhino's will to survive remains strong to the end. Death is never easy in Africa.
Fortunately for this rhino, the Milottes intervened.
We were able to put a rope around the head of this rhino, and then with our truck, we were able to pull him out. And he turned right around and started to push in the front of the car. That was how grateful he was. But that was really a very exciting time, and we did save that rhino's life.
After 3 years of living among the African wildlife, the Milottes bid their fondest farewell to the king of beasts, the African lion.
I just would like to have gotten out and petted them. They were so much like kitty cats. And they were so much fun. They played and they did all sorts of crazy things. And when we left, I said to them out loud, "Goodbye, lions, we're leaving now." And you know, those lions followed us for quite a ways. I don't know whether they thought we were really going or they liked us or what, but I always thought that was rather touching.
While the Milottes only observed wild animals, Lloyd Beebe brought them home with him. Walt Disney helped the Beebes establish their Olympic game farm west of Seattle, continuing a kinship with animals that goes back to Lloyd's boyhood.
I felt a little out of place around a bunch of people, and I was just quiet. I loved to listen to people, but I didn't want them saying anything to me, really. I think I was more comfortable when I was out playing in the woods and doing things all my life. And then, of course, it was a great country to grow up if you like the woods. You know, there's so many rivers and creeks to fish.
Lloyd had a touching relationship with animals, which allowed him to recreate nature scenes impossible to photograph in the wild. This cougar, or mountain lion, is one of his stars.
Well, I think I like cougars about as good as anything, yeah. They're such great hunters and kind of self-sufficient. They don't need anybody, seems like. You know, in the wild, they get along so good on their own. And they do a lot of traveling through an awful lot of nice country. I'd like to go with them.
The mature lion is a marvel of coordination and power. 200 pounds of sinew and muscle. Here is animal grace unsurpassed.
I just had a full-grown cougar, really, that Disney was interested in. And I had a lot of footage of just taking him up in the mountains and taking pictures of what he did naturally. And they called me as soon as they saw it and wanted to know if I couldn't help them finish Vanishing Prairie.
Walt wanted to demonstrate a point about nature protecting her young. So Lloyd Beebe tried a near-impossible maneuver with his cougar and a very young fawn.
It was a scene of a cougar. He walked all the way around the fawn, and it was 33 seconds long. It was the longest scene we'd ever done, I guess. And the fawn was asleep in the middle, and the cougar was walking around him close and then on down. Well, that was a kind of a worrisome thing, because I had to go ahead of him because he didn't like me particularly, put up with me. He knew I wasn't going to bother him. I had to kind of almost lead him around in all the way around the fawn and still be ready to save the fawn. So that was probably the most worrisome thing we did.
A puzzle in this game of life and death is the fact that the lion never caught the fawn's scent. But this is still another way nature protects her young. At this age, the fawn has no scent to give it away.
After finishing the Vanishing Prairie, Lloyd returned to his farm and wondered what was next.
I was on top of the world. You know, my dreams was coming true, and I couldn't think of a job I would rather do than work for Walt Disney at that time. And my wife and I talked, will we ever hear from him again, you know? And there was only a month or so went by and got a call and say, would you like to go to Canada on White Wilderness? And so we said, you bet. So away we went. They'd had me go up and tame 5 wild wolverines.
True to the bloodthirsty tradition of his kind, he can lick his weight in wolves, wildcats, or anything else that might come along.
All the park rangers said, you're never going to get him tame. They'll chew through log house or anything, and there's no way you can probably even keep them in a cage. And they said it's impossible. But I could see I never could tame them staying in a hotel. And it was, sometimes it was 40 below zero, but they were stored in a barn, just a warehouse. So I checked out of the hotel, got my sleeping bag, and went into the barn there. Never had a fire, nothing in there. When I had to go to town for parts, I'd turn the radio on right next to him so he'd never get any rest. At night, I slept alongside of him in my sleeping bag, and he'd charge and snarl. And then it got so he's just so sleepy that he'd have to go to sleep. So he'd try to sleep, and I'd reach out and I'd pull a straw or something. Just he'd raise up, and then I'd quit, you know, and he'd go back to sleep. I'd stick my finger and just make a little noise, and he'd wake up, and finally he said, "To heck with you, I've got to get rest." And all the time I'm talking and friendly and feeding him by hand, and I got him so that I'd break a raw egg in my hand, you know, and let it drip down all over in between and I'd put my hand right in the cage, and he'd come up there and eat it and lick between my fingers and clean my hand and everything. And they couldn't believe it, you know.
For the television film Monado the Wolverine, Lloyd teamed again with his Wolverine friend to stage scenes proving the animal's ferocity. Without the earlier months of rooming together, these shots would have been impossible. Like the Milottes, Lloyd was often sent to out-of-the-way places to film wild animals in their natural state. While filming Jungle Cat in the rainforests of Brazil, he was introduced to one of nature's most interesting oddities.
The giant anteater. It was kind of an unusual animal. When they go to sleep, you know, they'll lay down and that big wide tail flops right over them like a blanket. It's kind of interesting to me. Just can't see anything but their big tail. And then their long tongue, you know, they'd run in them holes and get them bugs and stuff. I think I enjoyed him about as much as any.
In many of Disney's dramatic films, Lloyd served as animal supervisor. In Nicky, Wild Dog of the North, he had to make a bear cub and a Malamute pup seem like best of friends.
We had to keep them together a lot, and we sort of had them grow up a little bit together. And they're playing, and that's who they got to play with. And they used to romp and wrestle. And at first they were tied together when they got the canoe tipped over. They were tied together with a buckskin thong. So, of course, you had to teach them to walk together. And they'd tangle up, and they were supposed to, of course, on things. But we finally got them separated. The knots come undone. It was even more difficult to get them to walk together sometimes, you know.
Niwa was less than half-grown, but already brute strong. And yet these two born enemies, even in the roughest play, would never hurt each other.
To all of us photographers in those days, we'd rather be out there without people and everything. But it got to where they wanted people and animals together. And if you're going to bring an actor in, you can't take him with you to get the wild stuff. So the only way we could do those pictures was to get animals that could be around actors.
For those Callaways, this was no easy task. The animal that Walt Disney chose to co-star in a climactic fight with actor Brandon D. Wilde was Lloyd's feisty friend, the Wolverine. It's no coincidence, considering their love of nature and animals, that both the Beebes and the Milottes chose to live at the foot of the Cascade Mountains in view of snow-capped Mount Rainier. In fact, this was a favorite spot of Walt Disney's. He often came up here with his family on a working vacation and to breathe some fresh mountain air.
They liked to see us because we were doing what they wished they could do, you know. They're in Hollywood, and we're out there running around the woods and the mountains and doing what they wish they could. Generally, I think he enjoyed talking to people from the woods, sort of thing. We weren't hillbillies, but we were a little bit that way, I suppose.
Today, Lloyd Beebe and his wife, Catherine, still run their Olympic game farm. Catherine often plays mother to the wild animals, and she best understands Lloyd's ability to tame them.
He has lots of patience. Lots of it, and I think they recognize it. And, you know, they know he thinks a lot of them, too. It's just his way with them. And partner any animal.
Both the Beebes and the Milottes worked as couples, Catherine home on the range, and Elma side by side with Al in the field 24 hours a day, an achievement a reporter once asked her about.
And I said, well, sure, we work together. We're together 24 hours a day. And he said, how can you stand it? I said, well, it's easy. It's harder to be apart than it is to be together.
The Milottes and the Beebes shared unique relationships with each other and the animal world around them, bringing to the screen some of the most memorable moments on film, Disney's true life adventures.